Hello and welcome everyone who's joining us from various places around the world to this FIDI Focus webinar. Lynn, I can see you first, so could we go to you first, please?
Thanks, Dominic. Hi, Lynn Shotwell, and I'm the President and CEO of the Worldwide Employee Relocation Council. So our members span kind of the entire spectrum of mobility, from the corporate mobility professionals all the way through the movers and the real estate agents and all of the providers that are involved in helping a family settle in.
Lovely, thank you. Welcome, Lynn. And next, Philippa, you're next on my screen.
Hi there, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Philippa Robinson from Robinson's Relocation in the UK, fourth generation family business owner. I'm a director at the business, and my passion has really started off with coordinating international moves, and then I've really just grown through that and still have a desire to have an interest and find solutions for global move management. That's where my passion lies.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Philippa. Gordon, I'm going to come to you next, please.
Hi, my name is Gordon Bell. I'm the chairman of the Asian Tigers Group, which covers Asia, Southeast Asia. I've been in the industry for about 44 years. 7 of those years are outside of the Asian Tigers Group, and the rest within the Asian Tigers Group. I'm responsible for agent relations, marketing, sales, business development, and our own board meetings. I'm thrilled to be here.
Lovely. Well, welcome to you as well. Thank you. Jan, can I come to you next, please?
Yes, of course. My name is Jan Blandy. I'm one of the owners and the CEO of Santa Fe Relocation. As such, I'm also responsible for all commercial matters within Santa Fe. And for those of you who don't know Santa Fe, we basically offer services across moving, destination services, immigration, as well as assignment management.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jan. And Paul, can I come to you next?
Yes.
Please?
Hi everyone, my name is Paul Bedard. I'm the Managing Director of Harmony Relocation Network. We are a global cooperative of house goods moving companies, and since last year also destination services providers. And we operate in this head office based in Amsterdam as a shared service center, trying to make our members either commercially more successful or allow them to save costs by doing things, I guess, centrally better than they can do decentrally.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you. Okay, so just before we start, just a reminder to the panelists, I will come to you and ask you by name to answer the various questions, either from me or from the audience. If you want to preempt me, just show me a virtual hand or a real hand, and I will come to you next. So to start off with, I wanted to take a look back to a year ago, or even 14 months ago, when the pandemic first hit the industry. And I think it's fair to say that everyone I spoke to at the time, and the stories I was writing for FIDI Focus magazine, the general outlook, the general flavour I was getting from the industry was things were looking very, very bleak. So I wanted to ask you, a year on from that, are things as bad as you thought they were going to be, or are we in a slightly different place to how you foresaw way back then? Lynn, can I come to you for that?
Yeah.
First off?
So I think certainly I don't think any of us thought we'd be locked down this long, but I think in terms of business impact, it's really been a mixed picture. So anyone who dealt only with corporate or international relocations obviously had a very, very difficult year. And we're seeing, the results of that through some of the mergers and acquisitions and other activities that are taking place. But on a domestic front, what we're finding, many of our real estate agents and moving companies actually had a very good year, but that was driven by personal moves rather than corporate moves. When I talk to corporate mobility professionals, I think they've also found themselves in a mixed situation. In some cases, they have gotten increased visibility within their companies and increased responsibility because the companies recognize that the skills that they had in dealing with moving employees around the world with employee engagement and kind of the complexities of non-traditional work is helpful in navigating this new world of remote work. In other cases, we've seen mobility, corporate mobility professionals either downsized or, you know, the team was downsized or the entire team was let go. So it's really been a mixed picture.
Okay. Lovely, thank you. Gordon, can I come across to you now? So the corporate moves have obviously been affected quite severely. How's that impacted things for you?
Horrible.
In a word.
I guess you know, every December, beginning of January or so, I start thinking about our managers meeting, which usually takes place at the end of February. I got a heads up in January that there was this thing called coronavirus around, and that I should take it quite seriously. I think by the end of January, the first couple of weeks in February, we realized that this was going to be awful, absolutely awful. We are in the international business. We don't have a domestic market like the US has or the Europeans have, and we rely very much on international business. In March, we were just locked down, absolutely locked down. There was no revenue coming in, there was no moves coming in, etc., etc. There were a few moves going out, and depending on what country, they managed to do some export, but it really was awful. Moving ahead a year, we know what we've been through. We know what we've had to change the way we do things. And to be honest, we've learned quite a lot. We've looked at other things to do to keep our workforce busy. But we never, ever expected this to be 12 months down the road. We were expecting 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, not 12 months. So we've still got a way to go, but we're better prepared. And we've spent quite a bit of time on doing things, which maybe we should have done 2-3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Jan, can I come to you next and just get your perspective on the reality versus the expectation a year ago?
Yeah. So when we took over Santa Fe in September of 2019, we knew we took over a company in crisis. I mean, you know, that was a very well hidden secret of the industry that Santa Fe wasn't doing great. So when the shit hit the fan in March of last year, we basically got ourselves in a crisis on top of a crisis that lasted way longer than we imagined it could actually last. So are we in a better place today? Absolutely. I'm thrilled we're alive and kicking, and that we actually managed to pull it through in spite of, you know, having the odds against us. And I think that's really down to one thing, which is basically our teams around the world, and the fact that this crisis has brought us much closer together than we ever were ahead of that. Are we in a better place as a company? No, we're much smaller. I mean, you know, we're 30% smaller than what we started the crisis from. And I guess, you know, when I'm saying we're 30% smaller, I think I'm not too far off from saying that, you know, probably the industry is also 30 to 40% smaller than what it used to be. So I guess, you know, in France, we have a national animal, which is basically the rooster. And that's a great animal, because the rooster is the only animal that can actually sing with both feet in deep shit. And I'm really glad to come from France, because, you know, I'm glad we're alive, but we're still in deep shit.
Okay. So I'm going to come across to you, Philippa, now. And can you give me your thoughts on, you know, where you thought we might be and where you are?
Sure. I mean, a lot of what I will say is very much personal opinion, and, you know, without facts and figures and so on. So it's all very much my own thoughts. But I too also didn't believe a year ago that we would be where we are now in terms of the pandemic. I thought it would be long gone. So crisis management is now being superseded by a more normal atmosphere of dealing with challenges every day. And they might be different again tomorrow. It's hard to predict, but I do feel like we're more ready for anything, and being ready for anything is really important. So in some ways, the industry is in a better place. Compliance is no longer a tick box, just tick the box and say you have it and move on. You have to be bothered to live and breathe it, because you're really exposed if you're not. Communication and customer expectation must be in place. Again, they're normally a given, but you have to communicate. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to communicate and understand customer expectations. I think everyone has a better understanding of the costs of doing business the right way, and that you can't afford to cut corners. I think cash flows improved. And also supply a year ago was far greater than demand. But now I do think the industry is left with professional operators. Yes, I agree with others that we're at least 30% reduction, but there still isn't enough work on. But the quality of professionalism, I think, has raised the bar. So I'd like to take a positive from it, and I think we're in a better place.
Okay, thank you. So we will touch on those positives a bit later on in the discussion as well. So thank you for that. Paul, can I come to you next and just ask for your perspective, your last year versus now?
Yeah, sure, Dominic. I don't think we're in a better place necessarily, because as Jan said, the market's down, etc. And it's vulnerable, the whole situation.
Is it better than how you expected it might
a lot
be?
Better, yeah. I think we're in a good place. I think if we could have signed for this outcome, then we would have done it immediately. As Gordon said, we expected this to last a payment term, maybe 30 days, maximum 120 days. But if I look at the perspective that I have within the network, is that in most common markets, there is a domestic market. And I think the diversified companies have used that to do a lot of other stuff other than international moving. We've seen a reverse megatrend, de-urbanization, people leaving the big cities, which has created a lot of work for all those that have capacity, that have trucks, that have warehouses, that have crews. Plus the fact that, of course, if you deal a lot with private people, your financial position improves a lot because it's all COD. So from that perspective, I think that the network is fairly stable financially. So we're in a good outcome position to anticipate growth from now on.
Okay, that sounds positive. Thank you. Jan, can I just come back to you and ask you the $1 million question, which is how long, now we know, perhaps we now know a bit more about how the pandemic has shaped things for us and how it might shape it in the future. Are we going to see irreversible trends in the industry, irreversible changes? Or are we looking at something that has a lifespan of 3 years, 4 years impact, and then we go back to business as usual?
Well, if I just look at the year 2021 and the way we've actually factored in 2021, we basically say like this: Q1 is going to be a prolongation of 2020, so it's going to look like shit, basically. Q2 is going to be a dramatic improvement, basically, because we're more geared toward Europe than Asia, like the Tigers. So as a consequence, there's going to be a natural improvement. And if there is no natural improvement, I guess I'll see all of you guys at the bar because we'll be dead by then. And then Q3, Q4 is basically impossible to predict because there's so many factors that are going to impact Q3, Q4. What I, however, personally feel is the following, which is that by the end of December, I still had a negative outlook. By the end of March, my outlook has turned to neutral. And the reason why is basically because the forces are more in balance now, if you will. You have positive things happening. CEO surveys of McKinsey and others shows positivism is back. China is going to grow by more than 6% this year, according to the Prime Minister. You see that when Israel is reopening, basically the society is back and living to normalcy, et cetera, right? However, there still are forces that are still very negative. I mean, vaccination, except in Israel, UAE, US, and UK, is darn slow. I mean, in France, we're going back to a form of lockdown. Germany is back in some form of lockdown. the freight rate and the container crisis is, negatively impacting our industry right now, even though it may just get out by the end of Q2. And finally, what we have is that up until yesterday, we had some uncertainty regarding the US visa ban, which apparently has expired of itself. Yeah. So actually, my overall perspective now has gone from negative to neutral, but it's not yet positive outlook.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you for that. In that case, I'm going to go to Philippa, because you took quite an optimistic view of the first question. How long can you see this impacting on the industry?
I try and be positive about most things, because otherwise you just get dragged down. Unless you can do something about it, I don't see the point of being too miserable for too long. I mean, look, the actual virus and the restrictions that have come with travel, human interaction, I think will be with us at least for another year or even 2 years. Globally, there are some countries doing better than others, but, Germany and France, like Jan's just explained, this time a week ago, they weren't doing so badly, but it all happens again, all changes so quickly. But I think the global recession as a result of COVID, like with other global recessions, will be felt for many years to come. And I think that will be where the changes come, is because of the recession that's come about from it. But I do think it will also shape businesses for the better in years to come. And just like evolution, it will be survival of the fittest. So I think the impacts will be with us for a long, long time. But I don't see it as being a reason not to do business or not to plan for a future. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Gordon, could you give me an Asian Tigers view of the situation?
I don't think moving is going to go away. I think there'll always be room for good movers. I think what's going to happen is that we've probably come on leaps and bounds with what we've learnt over the last year or so. But, we have to depend on clients moving their personnel. And I think that there's going to be some changes there. I think that there are going to be possibly not so many people coming to a posting. I think there's going to be a little bit more requirements if someone is going to move from A to B. Mm-hmm. I also think that, which is not really good for our industry, but I think there's going to be, people aren't going to be willing to go for the length of time that they normally go to, to possibly 3 to 5 years or so. They're looking at short term, but there are also companies who are going to look at looking after a country from another country, third country. So I think, if you're going to go for shorter terms, people are going to go into short-term accommodation. So leases are going to have to be a little bit different. Some will go into furnished places, so they're bringing a suitcase. So there's no requirement for a mover, which is not good for us. But I guess you have to look at your own company and size your own company. As Jan said, his company's decreased by 30%. Maybe that's a good thing. As far as facilities goes and all that sort of thing, again, we all have to look at what we have. If you're not filling your warehouses, what's the point of having it?
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Gordon. Lynn, can I come to you next? Now, those changes that Gordon was talking about, the change in length of move and the change of type of move, do you see this? Presumably, this was a trend that was there in the background before COVID and has been accelerated by it. Do you think it is something that's being made permanent and irreversible by COVID?
So I think the COVID has forever changed kind of how we're going to approach relocation and talent management. But how that ultimately plays out in terms of long-term, short-term transfers, I think that remains to be seen. Because I think there are two things that we need to keep in mind. Is the demographics haven't changed for the better in terms of the competition for talent. So despite the huge levels of unemployment, most people who are unemployed don't necessarily have the skills that will be in demand moving forward. So we've got to figure out how do we match, how will employers access the talent they need for the jobs of the future? Now, remote work will provide access to a larger labor pool to a certain extent, but it's not going to solve the problem. We continue to have an aging population. The pandemic has not resulted even in a baby boom, and we've seen more women drop out of the workforce. So I think what we will see is that when companies need to move employees, they're going to have to offer different packages than they did in the past, perhaps richer packages, because we've also seen surveys that people are more reluctant to move, and they're choosing different locations about where they do move. So I think all of that's going to have to come into play. And then I think the other thing is technology, right? Both in terms of how is that going to facilitate moves. We've got to create some standards so that it's easier for information and employees' information to flow throughout the entire process. But also, the other unknown is, I think, remote work is great. All of these Zoom meetings are great, but there's still a need for us to get together in person. And so to what extent are employers going to be able to onboard employees and provide them with the cultural competencies they need in this environment? So I don't think relocation is in any way dead. I just think it's going to change, but it change in ways that we can't completely predict right now.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to revisit that the technology point in a second. Yeah. First off, I'm just going to come to Paul for last points on that. How long do you think we're going to be feeling the impact, the direct impact of the pandemic in the industry?
I think it's going to be slow before we are back to the levels of pre-corona, maybe even never. I think HR and mobility have so many issues on their plate, and relocation isn't one of them. It's all about implication on tax and social security, work from anywhere. Perhaps they used to have 10 expats in 4 countries, and now they have 4 expats in 10 countries, or 40 expats in 10 countries. So it becomes a lot more complex, and we are a secondary service. We have no ability to create our own demand rather than perhaps acquire companies. So it's very difficult. So the adaptation of the level of supply that we offer as an industry will have to adapt itself to the size of the market, and that could come in shocks, bankruptcies, etc.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Paul. Jan, can I come to you now on this point about digital disruption? I think you referred to it as digital disorientation last week when we spoke. We've had the online meetings, we've had staff working from home, but in what ways do you see digital now really changing the industry? Not just in these sort of ways that it changes every industry, what specifically is going to change for relocation?
So when I look at it, basically, when we did some strategy exercise last year when COVID hit, we basically did a very simple metrics for ourselves. This crisis is going to change the way we work, or this crisis is going to change the way we live. Meaning that it's going to change the way we work. Companies want to move people, but people don't want to move. And this is going to change the way we live. Basically, people are going to continue wanting to move or not continuing to move. And if we were up here, it's all fine. We're back to where we started. If we're down here, we're all dead. But basically, what I actually see, quite interestingly enough, is that we both have now a very, very strong consumer business developing because people continue to want to move on the one hand. And on the other hand, we basically see very white glove, high-end services towards basically companies, with the duty of care and everything else, because, people moving with their families, everything that has been said before, you need to take care of that. And when we looked at that, we basically realized that, it was very difficult to choose, but there were a number of common denominators. One, it would be smaller. 2, technology would be absolutely instrumental to doing that. So what we've done as an organization is that we basically dramatically reallocated resources away from traditional assets, basically warehouses. Why spend $750K on an empty warehouse to reinvest it in technology? because obviously that's where it's going to make a difference. And whether it is digital marketing or whether it's efficiency of our processes. Now, if you take that one step further, what I think is going to happen to this industry potentially is that this industry has not yet been disintermediated. You know, you look at the taxi business, everyone knows Uber, and Uber, all the value is in Uber. Take the travel industry, everyone knows Expedia, and you look at, you know, hospitality industry, everyone knows Airbnb, etc., etc. And then, you know, I'm very new in this industry, but I hear about all of those companies, Relo Trackers, Movinga, Bellhops, WorldPath, UrbanBound, U Butler, all that sort of companies. I mean, take a company like Bellhops, you know, digital only, domestic moving US, being financed up to $60 million. Who of the traditional movers has been financed up to $60 million? So I think there is a risk for us if we don't get our shit right when it comes to digital, on all levels of digital, that we're going to be disintermediated and we're just going to be left to being basically carrying the last mile. And that is one of the things that really keeps us awake at night, to make sure that we dramatically reallocate our resources, money, people, and time towards those things that are going to carry this industry in the future. And digital is absolutely front and center.
Okay, Gordon, slightly earlier before we went on air, we touched on the subject of digital briefly. How do Jan's comments make you sort of feel? Does it make you feel any differently about digital in the industry?
No, not really. I think probably he's right. I mean, the fact that we've sort of turned, we've had time. So in the last year, we've focused on, you know, more digital work, more in terms of marketing, in terms of advertising, but also in terms of in-house. What do we do in-house? We want fewer people to do more work. So no, definitely, he's right on. He's spot on.
Okay.
I would like to say different, but you know, he's right.
Okay. Lynn, could I just come back to you for a further comment on the disruption we're going to feel from technology in relocation?
So this is, obviously we were feeling the disruption of technology before the pandemic, but what I'm hearing on all sides of this is the need for some sort of standards. The corporates want to be able to go out and put in an RFP. You must be able to talk to my systems. Service providers are telling me I don't want to have to, you know, change my system for every corporate client. So we've got to come up with some standards across the industry to kind of manage this technology so that we can then focus on the things that actually add higher value. The other piece of this on the other end is government. So as governments want more information electronically, whether it's immigration forms or customs forms or other things, we need to have standards. So again, we're not recreating the wheel for every government.
Okay. Fine. Philippa, technology. I'm going to go back to when we spoke last week. We talked about the cost for a mover. Is it still too expensive for a traditional mover to invest in the technology they need?
I mean, technology and digital and anything that involves all of that, I personally find a little bit scary, and I'm quite honest about that. As a business, we've been there, done it a few years ago. It costs a lot of money and it doesn't necessarily bring you in the return that you would like. I think we've all faced up to the fact that we need to address efficiency with technology. The problem that I think we as an industry have is we're not technology companies. We're moving companies. We're DSP companies. And some of these tech companies have huge investments behind them, and sometimes they fail and it doesn't matter, they move on, and sometimes, you know, they make money and they take over. But touching on what Lynn has said, I think what's important is that we come together as an industry and actually say, where do we need to prioritize our technological advances? You know, what do we need to sort out? What do we need to offer, and how are we going to offer that? I think each individual company trying to do their own thing is probably a little bit futile. Somebody might get a competitive edge at some point, only to be taken over and leapfrogged by somebody else. So I think it's important we agree on what technology we need to invest in as an industry, what standards we're also going to agree to, and I know there's a lot of work going on with that, because we have to, we absolutely have to be fitter, to be better, and to be more appropriate for the future. Okay, lovely. Now, Paul, I think you probably know I'm going to come to you next, because we had a conversation last week, didn't we, in which we were talking about the US Transcom deal, and you said something to me which I hadn't thought about, which was how that may impact the take-up of technology, and it may stimulate the take-up of technology in moving. Could you just give us...
and it's related to some other things. Of course, I agree with you. Many other industries, you see the adaptation of technology, consumer-facing technology, a lot faster than in ours. We are very slow to adapt technology. I think partly over the last couple of years, I would say 6-7 years, I've seen quite a few technology initiatives come and go, always outside investors. And I think those outside investors are quickly disappointed by the return on investment they're getting on those initiatives. Where the house of goods moving in DSP industry, it's not a huge industry compared to hotels and travel and taxi, etc. So it's a much smaller market. And so I do think that the technology initiatives that are successful have to come from within the industry rather than from outside. And in that context, I think that the US Transcom deal, because a lot of volume is going to be concentrated with just one supplier, if they make a decision on technology, it could probably become the world standard. So I do think we have to watch that space to see where that is going. None of us, of course, are experts on the US Transcom deal, but I do think that that will drive global standardization.
Yeah, I don't actually remember. I've written a few stories about this FIDI Focus, and I don't remember off the top of my head how many moves it accounts for, but it's a lot of moves annually. And
yeah.
So what you're saying is basically, with all these people having to answer to one company, one provider of this contract, all those people who are providing services through that company need to be conforming to the same standards.
Of course, it can only be managed from one platform using one technology. And they then have the power to enforce the whole supply chain to use that technology. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why that could become the world standard.
Interesting. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to move on to the subject we just touched on there as well, which is mergers and acquisitions in the industry. And I know there are some slightly different opinions from the panel, from depending on where you stand, your particular perspective. We obviously had the Darrell Flood news today. That's obviously a big acquisition there. Jan, I think when we've spoken in the past, your feeling is very much that the process of consolidation in moving has only just begun. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, the moving industry is completely under consolidated. If you look at big, larger industries around the world, you would have 5-6 players controlling 50-60% of the market. And here, you have so many small players, completely under consolidated. And as far as I'm concerned, there is only, you can be either passive or active, and you can be active in two ways. Either you are lunch or you eat lunch. And then you can be passive and you just watch everyone else having lunch. But I guess, we're going to see much more of that, and not the least also because you're going to have some generational issues in this industry where a number of old gentlemen maybe haven't secured their the next generational shift in their businesses. Now, I just want to comment back on the digital piece and say that, I'm not necessarily sure I agree with some of the things that were said. To me, it's not about having a digital strategy, but every moving business needs to have a strategy that is relevant for the digital age. And for sure, I'm not going to wait for the industry to drive some standards to actually make sure that my company is having a strategy for the digital age. If it's going at industry speed, we're going to be dead before we even start.
So you're saying we need to get on, we need to get on with it. Standards can come later.
Well, I'll catch up with any standard that catch up with us.
Okay. Okay. Lynn, what are your thoughts on that, on the standardization issue? Is that something we need to address now, or can we leave it?
I think it's something that as we mature as an industry, we need to address, but I also agree with Jan. What we have to do is make sure that we're working with the leading players in this and getting input from everyone so that anything that we do come up with doesn't advantage a particular company but allows us to kind of have something that enables and facilitates transfers across the board. I mean, whether it's at the corporate level, whether it's interacting with governments. So I think there's a role for standards, but I also understand Jan's issue here that traditionally standards, ISO standards, things like that take years and years to develop, and that's not the time frame we're talking about. We can't wait and be on that type of a timetable.
Lovely. Okay, thank you, Lynn. Gordon, I'm going to come across to you now and just return to the mergers and acquisitions subject specifically. What are your thoughts on consolidation in the industry? Are we going to see more of it? I think we're going to see more of it, but is it going to be as large as maybe Jan thinks it's going to be?
I think the moving industry has had a bad rap with people who have acquired other companies. And that's possibly down to its own personnel, different ways that they run companies, et cetera, et cetera. I think you need a strong arm at the top of that, shifting orders and telling people exactly how it's going to happen. And you stay or you go. And if you stay, these are the things you need to follow. Is it going to happen? Yes, absolutely, it's going to happen. And when I say it's going to happen, it's is it going to be out of the ordinary? Not sure. I'm not sure. I think it's tough to pay a lot of money. I mean, these moving companies seem to earn quite a lot of money, and all of a sudden, overnight, it's gone and it's finished. And it also depends on accounts. You know how strong they are on accounts. Everyone says they'll bring an account with them. Well, that's rubbish. The account is with the company. It's with the people who run that company. So you need a bit of both, actually, for an acquisition. So tread carefully, you know, have a good look at what you're buying.
Okay, interesting. Paul, can I come to you? I know you have some thoughts on this specific.
Yeah, sure. And I think you just mentioned one acquisition. There's mergers and there's acquisitions. Yeah, we discussed that before. I do think that there will be more of a clear separation between being an RMC, being a booker mover, or being a DSP. I do think that you'll see scale enlargement in all three segments, but separated rather than integrated. It's very difficult to be that integrated company. And you may also see some regional players, Asia-Pacific players, EMEA players, and Americas players, rather than just global players, because each market's different.
Okay.
But I do see that consolidation will be taking place, but in separate markets.
Separate markets, okay. And can you see it? Can you see the industry reducing to? I think we talked about sort of 4 to 6 major players holding 60% of the market.
Separate between those that book the business and those that execute. I think you can have perfectly a large supply chain because the threshold of starting a moving company or a DSP are not so high. You can be a very good operator in a certain business without booking much business yourself directly. But I think it will focus on those that book the business and those that execute the business. There you'll see a clear separation.
The core mover. Yeah. Okay. And so presumably the core moving industry holds some good cards from that point of view in terms of longevity in the business. Good. I'm going to move on to the subject of talent management because I'm quite conscious of our time. Lynn, we talked about the changing nature of talent management and how that's going to develop, or how it has developed in the last few months. Could you give us some thoughts on that?
So certainly. we've done some research with CEOs and CHROs to talk about kind of what are they thinking about with the future of talent management. So certainly remote work is here to stay, but remote work doesn't kind of come on its own. That's not the only piece. It really, you have to look at what are the ties to employee engagement, to diversity and inclusion, to your sustainability initiatives. So I think, as we think about the pandemic over this last year, it isn't just remote work that's kind of uprooted what employees want and what employers are seeking, but we've got to take into account the whole Black Lives Matter and the need for diversity and inclusion, climate change, and the focus on sustainability. And I think, really this really big shift in both what employees want and what employers are willing to offer in terms of work location and building a corporate culture. So I think talent management is an area, again, that's going to shift tremendously over the next couple of years as we start to figure out what does it mean to have a large number or a large percentage of the workforce that's out of the office, and when do you bring the people back into the office? So a lot of shifting sands here that will ultimately then impact relocation.
And you've spoken before about the mobility industry taking a leading role in helping corporations get to grips with the new nature of managing their workplace forces.
Right.
Could you give us a little
Sure.
more on that?
I think that comes in really, the two areas where I see mobility professionals having experience that applies now to the remote work situation are in compliance and in employee engagement. So with employee engagement, I think we have had a sense of how do you take care of people who are going through really untraditional work situations. As we've moved people, whether it's domestically or internationally, you're taking care of them and kind of their whole family in a different way. And one of the things that mobility professionals have focused on is how do you re-engage that employee when they come back from an assignment? How do you successfully integrate them when they go on assignment? How do you reintegrate them when they come back? I think that's a lot of what's going to have to happen with remote work is how do you continue to engage employees? On the other hand, you have just the compliance issues. So the tax issues, the employment law issues, all of those things that we've always dealt with on an international basis are now coming up in domestic relocations in a way that I think is surprising many, many people. And that goes, I think, to, we were talking about maturing as an industry. So as we mature as an industry, I think the other thing that we can do is provide advice to policymakers who are also struggling with how do you, the laws that we have today were not built for today's world. And so how do we have policymakers revise the laws and the regulations to kind of address today's world and the way that we're going to be working? And that's not going to be easy, but that's where it's, I think, so important to draw upon the experience that we have in this to help them craft policies moving forward.
Okay, lovely. Do any other panelists want to have a word on that particular subject of talent management before we move on? No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much for that, Lynn. So again, I'm conscious of our time, so I'm going to move on to the question of the positive outcomes of what's happened over the past year. Can I just go round to each one of you and just get your thoughts on how the industry, I know we were all talking about efficiency, how this could change the industry for better a year ago, but now in practice, having been there, what do you see as perhaps being the number one or the number two benefit to have come out of the pandemic? I'm going to go to Gordon for this first.
You can't rely on a bank. You got to get cash. You got to make sure that you're collecting. And when I say you're collecting, you've got to be a bit harder. I think we've been too soft in the past. We are asked to prepay a lot of the times. What we've done also is to agree on things on a handshake. So I can tell you from our point of view that our AR department is very busy, and they're on it all the time. So collect your money, become a little bit more efficient because you can use that money a lot more than having it in someone else's pocket.
Okay, I could see some nodding heads there from the other panelists. Hopefully we're not going to get 5 of the same answer, but Philippa, what would you say is the biggest positive to have come out of the past year?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, cash flow was just so important. It got out of control in prior years. I've got quite a few C's in my little notes here. Cost control. I think a lot of us were having to work out during COVID, well, where are we going to save? Where are we going to save some costs? So, you know, I think that will continue. Everyone will start considering, right, what's the return on investment on that? And it could be large amounts, it could be small amounts, but I think there's a different culture now of cost control and not being complacent about that. My other C's were compliance. I think businesses will have to pay more attention to compliance. I mentioned it before, the communication and customer expectation. It's really key. I know we talk about it, and again, the more we go down the technology digital route, the more we're trying to standardize how we communicate. But this is moving so quickly, you've still got to have that human element to manage customer expectations and communicate effectively. So there are quite a few C's in there without saying the naughty C word. Sorry for my English.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for that Philippa. And I'm going to go to Paul next. What's your positive to have come out of the last year?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. I think that the industry, what we see, has professionalized. They've matured in a year. Focus on costs, focus on sustainability, a lot more focus on health and safety, become more agile, how to deal with disruption, much more open for technology than we used to be suddenly. And I also think that although we've always realized how important our people were, I think we've come to realize that those are so critical to what we do in serving our customers. I think that has hopefully gotten some new appreciation generally, I would say.
Great, thank you very much. Philippa.
Just to add on to that, I completely agree, Paul. I think especially with intra-European moving, it does seem that the welfare of the drivers and those who are travelling long distance, going into people's homes, I think the welfare and general employee welfare has really come to the front page, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, Gordon.
You know, I've got to take my hat off to every manager who manages a group of people. And then again, I got to take my hat off to the employees who have hung this out. Number one, it's the managers who have to give the bad news to the employees about specific cuts to get through a period. So, you know, good on them. It's a horrible thing to do. And for those people, you know, who have had cuts, their outgoings stay the same, and you know, they're going back to sometimes, you know, a crowded house, and then being told to stay in there. So hats to them, and I'm looking forward to seeing them all back in the office.
Okay, great, thanks, Gordon. Jan.
Yeah, I think, you know, this crisis, if I look at the positive, you know, on the point Gordon was making about cash, you know, my first printer was called Cash is King. I can tell you that at Santa Fe, within very, very few days of the crisis happening, and when we saw the magnitude, we implemented 13 weeks rolling cash flows. And if you deviated by 1 or 2%, you had to say why. And you know, we really professionalized, to Paul's words, our handling of cash. But more importantly, actually, this crisis gave an opportunity to actually bring Santa Fe together in a way that, you know, we hadn't had for a very, very long time. You know, basically this team cohesion that we may have lacked in the past, speed that we probably lacked as well. You know, you could do in weeks what would have taken months before to do. The agility that we found in solving solutions without cutting corners. And finally, I think, you know, we've basically been running the marathon at the speed of a 100-meter race, which basically means that the organization has built a form of resilience, which I'm really hoping that all of those characteristics will actually going to bring with us now in a post-pandemic world.
Lovely. Okay, that's a nice positive from you, Jan. Thank you. Paul. Paul, I've been to you already. I do apologise. Lynn.
So as an association, what I am really pleased to see is how much our community's been able to connect virtually. I think it's added an entire new dimension. I think we're able to collaborate and share in a way that we've never been able to. At the same time, I think it's reinforced for us the importance of those personal connections and getting together. You know, we have our first conference in the fall, hopefully in person, we're planning it. But I'm thinking about, you know, can I just turn every conference room into a bar? Because that seems to be what people miss, is that real personal connection and getting together.
Lots of nodding heads there.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Okay, so on that note, in the bar, we are just going to move to the last question that I have before we move on to the audience questions, and that is just to go to you each and ask you for one piece of best practice, so something you've learned for your corner of the industry over the last year that you want to pass on to the audience as a must have. I'm going to start with Gordon. I'll start with Gordon first.
Computers, telephones, messages, WhatsApp notes. We seem to have forgotten how to speak to our shippers. We need to keep talking to our shippers. We need to tell our shippers what's going to happen, what we think is going to happen, and not leave it until it's done. Yeah, it's too late. We've got to get our management team, not only our management team, but also our move managers, our relo managers, to talk more. You know, I talk to them on a daily basis, and I says, you've got to pick up the phone. So that's what we're trying to do now. Pick up the phone and become human. And I know that a lot of the younger people don't have time and they want a message, but at least give it a go.
I like that, Gordon. Yeah, thank you very much. Jan, can I come to you next?
Mm-hmm. Actually, my learning is more on a personal level. I don't think any one of us has ever been trained to manage through a crisis like this. At least I know I haven't, to be quite honest. And my personal learning has been, you know, to dare to be vulnerable as a leader, to spend way more time actually listening to what's going on the ground, because this is moving so fast that if you're sitting in your ivory tower, you know, and you believe you know everything, actually you know shit. So you really need to listen much more carefully. And finally, which has been actually quite important, it's like just to take care of your own health. You know, in the end of the day, you know, we're not surgeons, we're not saving lives. You know, so there's very, very few things of what we do that actually needs to be done absolutely within the next 3 hours or someone's going to die. So these have been some, you know, personal learnings, just to put a little bit of relativity in everything we do.
Yeah, very sensible too. Thank you very much for that, Jan. I'm going to go to Philippa next.
I know you asked for one best practice, but I tend to waffle. So I've got a few that there's kind of rolled into one. It's, you know, look forward. That's the way we're going. Even if you don't have a crystal ball, and be open-minded and look at the alternative complementary service streams that you might be able to go in for. Give it a go. A little bit touched on before is look at your succession planning. We are an aging industry, and FIDI is and traditionally been made up of family moving businesses. I think succession planning, address it head on. Don't be scared of it. And, you know, best practice, I think has been touched on again just now, is that we speak to each other much more now. We're much closer. We've become more human again. And we've been able to see that relationships do matter. As much as we go down the tech route, as much as we go down the standardized route, as much as we go down everything else, relationships really matter in this industry. So those would be my recommendations. And that's really wrapped up in a culture. So consider your culture, what underpins your business.
So another C from you, Philippa.
Sorry, yes, another C.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Lynn, can I come to you next?
Sure. So I actually started in this job on March 30th a year ago. So I'd say the one thing I've really learned is to not be afraid to experiment. Even with my team and the communications, I still haven't met most of them in person. And so how we communicate and how often it has shifted, and we try it out for a little bit, see how it's working, and change and try something else. So I think we all just have to be agile. And I also agree with I think it's been a very humbling year and made us all a bit more human, and that's a good thing.
Lovely. Okay, thanks for that thought. And finally, Paul.
Yeah, diversify. Don't just depend on one. I think the companies that depend on one client type or segment or product have been most vulnerable. So diversify, even if that's expensive. And when you diversify and develop new clients, stay so close to them. As Gordon said, talk to them, because they'll be the ones to tell you how to improve and where to improve, and that absolutely pays off. So stay very close to your client. Whether that's a corporate, an RMC, a private client, or an agent relationship, stay as close to them as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Paul. I think now we are going to move to some questions, and I will hand over to Magali, which in a moment you'll hear her voice.
Yes, hello everybody. So I have to admit that I wasn't listening all the time because the chat in the chat box was absolutely on fire, and on LinkedIn as well. So there are loads of questions, loads of comments. So if we address them all, we'll still be sitting here this time next year. So I'll try and keep it short, and I'll try and group them a bit. But first of all, one of the leader of the pack in the chat was our friend from Singapore, Carl Hagstrom. I think everybody knows him. And it's his birthday in exactly 2 minutes. So just a quick happy birthday, Carl, from all over the world. I told you I wouldn't put it live, so don't tempt me next time. So let's get on with the questions. So like I said, there's a lot happening in the chat. So I think we touched on many sensitive points here. I'll start off with a very broad philosophical question that comes from Martin Puls. So, if the industry has declined by at least 30%, as we mentioned at one point, what are the top 3 changes that relocation companies have adopted?
Okay, so does someone want to volunteer for that one? Shall we go for Paul? You look like you have an answer in your head.
Well, corporate business has dropped 30% or so, but moving business in general hasn't dropped 30%, especially where there's a domestic market. Many domestic markets have done extremely well. Most of the companies that I speak to, storage is full, etc. So they are, they're doing well. So I cannot comment possibly on just being a corporate mover or a corporate RMC, because we're not an RMC. So perhaps somebody else wants to comment on that.
I think our export business has, it depends on the country. We've still had an export business. It's our inbound business which has come down. And when I say our inbound business, if you can't get a visa to come into a country, you can't bring your household goods. So they're sitting somewhere, or they haven't been packed yet. But that's probably one of the biggest impacts that's made that we've seen.
Okay, lovely. Jan?
I think for me, it's really about one thing. It's been about focus, and focus in different ways. Number one, in resource reallocation, right? So being extremely determined in how you reallocate your resources. I mean, why should I pay 700,000 euros for an empty warehouse when I only spend 700,000 euro on digital marketing? I should double down my investment on digital marketing rather than paying for heavy assets, right? Same thing with talent. In our organization, there are probably 100 jobs that can make a very, very significant difference. Do I have A players in those jobs, yes or no? And being very clear about making sure that we actually allocate our best talents to the job that really make a difference. And focus is also towards what you do. You know, I hear the thesis of diversity. I would actually urge you to consider not to do that. That would be actually our take. And the reason for that is to say that, you know, it depends how you define diversification, which is that if you have your core business, you can expand your core where you can utilize your existing assets, you know, whether they're your capabilities, your warehouses, your trucks, etc. But diversifying beyond this near realm, I would actually urge you not to do that, because that can be extremely costly, to Paul's point. So for us, it's been really about focusing. Do fewer things, do them very well.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jan. I'm going to ask Magali for the next question.
Next question, yes. So we'll change a bit the topic to what we just said before, the shift in the entire industry and how the sector was already changing before COVID, and how COVID has maybe accelerated some shifting trends. So we've got Mark Oakshott, who's asking if you see any erosion in the profile of relocation management in general, as shipment size reduces and corporate clients become more agile and selective about services. Is there a shift in the way the supply chain is managed?
Is there a shift in the way the supply chain is managed? Let's go for that one to Paul.
Oh, let's focus on if you think that the profile of relocation management companies has changed, or if there's an actual erosion of the role of the RMC in our supply chain nowadays.
Okay. Paul,
I'm just gonna step in here because it's a tricky one, because they've got so much power, the RMCs, and I don't think things have changed that much. I think during this crisis that they're trying to work it out what's best. So I don't think there has been a huge change. Whether there'll have to be a huge change going forward, I guess so, but I think that's probably the same as all times, is they constantly have to change, they constantly have to be relevant and make sure that their supply chain is relevant. So I don't think, personally, I don't think we've seen any major changes yet, but they are no doubt to come.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippa. Jan?
Yeah, two things on that. I mean, the number one thing is that I would do everything I can to maintain our independence towards RMC. You know, 80 to 90% of our business is a revenue stream which is non-RMC directed, and I'm very glad it's this way, and I'm going to do everything I can to maintain it this way. I want to control our own destiny. I don't want to be able to be told where to sit and then where to go and all that sort of things. Number two, what I actually see in our dialogue with RMCs is that they really try to reduce the number of players they have in their supply chain, because obviously this crisis has weakened the number of players. So they want fewer players, they want more stable players, more financially secure players. And we do see that actually from a number of individuals in the industry we speak to, that they're actually cleaning up their supply chain.
Okay, thank you very much.
Perfect. So then if maybe someone else wants to chip in, no? Then let's change topics again, and we talk about client expectations. So was something that came up in the debate about how difficult it is with the rising shipping prices and the problem of sourcing material. It's all becoming very difficult, and it's also difficult to explain that to a client. So Carl did give us a lot of examples in the chat of what now is impacting a price of a international move. And then we have Mario Amato, who is asking if you as international movers have experienced over the past 12 months any particular challenges to meet shippers' expectations, and if you, in your experience, saw that shippers were generally understanding and tolerant of your circumstances.
As far as the ocean freight goes, the ocean freight price is the ocean freight price. I guess the only problem is that if it changes by the time the quotation goes out to when it's actually shipping, you're facing a tough conversation. That conversation has to take place, otherwise the shipment doesn't move. So you have to explain it and give alternatives. But really, the alternatives at the end of the day is, do we hold it, which might cost you just as much? How long do you want us to hold it for? And then all of a sudden, they believe that we know what the shipping companies are going to do. We don't know. Yeah. I also think it's from a different point of view. It's what will the corporate company or what will the individual pay to move his household goods? The price. All we're doing is we're informing them of a shipping rate change due to a situation which you can read in the press. So the outcome, I mean, Mario asked, what is the outcome? Is it always pretty good? No, it's never good. You're increasing your price, so no one's ever happy. As far as in this world, we have to become more competitive. And when I say more competitive, because we are, and so I've been told many, many times, we are the last rung on the ladder. So they come to us first for the first discount, and then they'll ask everybody else. Yeah. So we've got to find ways to decrease our costs. Yeah. And when it gets to a point where we can go no further, we've just got to say, that's it. We're done. Sorry, go to someone else.
Jan, you've got your hand up there.
Just to complement on that, I agree with the transparency towards the shipper. I mean, Philippa was talking about it before, that there are things we control, there are things we don't control. And freight rate is something we don't control, period. It happens to everyone. So transparency is critical, and transparency as early as possible. And then to Gordon's point, we still see RFPs coming out requesting fixed rates for the next 3 years as far as shipping is concerned.
Yeah.
And what I basically say to the guys, the commercial guys going into those conversations, you ask for, whether this is a deal breaker. And if it's a deal breaker, we just walk away. We're just not going to waste our time for people who don't know how to read the newspapers. And then the last piece, which I don't think we still have entirely figured out, is actually how much more do I need to build in revenues right now to actually maintain my gross profits? Because if I just look at the freight rate as part of my total cost, etc., I think we figured out that any 10% increase in freight rates means we need to have 1% more of revenue to maintain our gross profit. But if it increases with 300%, then how much more do I need to build to be able to actually maintain my gross profits? And that equation, I don't think we've fully figured it out yet.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go to Philippa and then I'll come to you afterwards, Paul.
I think cost is one thing. Customer expectations, cost is way on, high up on the list, whether they're corporate or private. The other thing that we constantly have to pay attention to, and that's timing, and expectations are, when will I get my stuff? When are you coming? And when will I get it? That's the other thing that's just a really moving target. So again, that's where we have had to up our game. And nothing is set in stone. What used to be 7 to 10 days, or for a European move, direct move, was 2 to 3 days. You now have to you have to say it could be this, but then you have to explain going through, and so that you're helping them to understand that you're not being difficult, but there are just too many unknowns, and it is changing all the time. So those are the two areas: is the timings and the costs.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for that, Philippa. Paul.
Well, yeah, I was going to mention the same thing about managing the client's expectation upfront, obviously, to avoid them being completely surprised, but also make sure that your terms and conditions allow for that, so that at least you're legally covered.
Okay, thank you. And Gordon.
Sorry, one thing I missed. There used to be, in the old days, good old days, just a tiny little bit of fat on there, where, because we're located in cities, mainly cities in Asia, nothing was a problem. We would excel. We would go a step further. If someone wanted us to pick rubbish up a third or fourth time, hey, when we're passing by, of course we'll do it. We have to get better at managing that, because now we have to charge because that has gone. So once again, you need to talk to your customers. You need to talk to your move managers. Charge. You got to charge. It's an extra service. And we're not very good at that in Asia.
Lovely. Thank you very much, panelists. Magali, do we have another?
Yes, we've got loads and loads of other questions, but I'm very, very aware of the time. So to everybody, and you are many who have asked questions which we did not address, I will make sure that our panelists do get them, and we will get back to you either directly or in any case in one of the upcoming FIDI Focus feature articles that will be based on this conversation. And we will continue this because apparently there is a lot to say and there are many paths to take. So I will just close off, I think, with a more philosophical question, which actually works really well, seeing the different branches of our industry that our panelists actually represent. And this question comes from Jacqueline Biersma, who says, how do we in the industry ensure to have a seat at the big table? Will we be hosting, for example, a think tank addressing wider providers in the entire global mobility mix, which would include all of the supply chain of the relocation world, to balance out maybe the tech newbies that try to enter the industry?
Okay.
This is an association question because they represent us as the industry.
Yeah.
Yes, but you can come with wishes or advice, because this is absolutely down our road. So I'm sure that our associations that are listening and that are hosting this panel would be more than interested.
Pushing the question towards Lynn.
Yeah. I was going to say, Lynn, I think you've got the big table that's been referred to. I think you've got the keys to the door to the big table room.
Oh, I'd love to think I have the key. We're trying to do that. So I think one of the things we have to do is come together as an industry with a common voice. You know, one of the things, my background is I come from a policy making background where I've worked with governments for many years. And if I went up and I said I represented the automobile industry or the hotel industry, policymakers would know what I was talking about. And I would have that data to say, you know, the sales across the industry declined by 30% last year. We don't have that for this industry. And, you know, we have it for pieces of the industry, but we don't have something overall. So I think one of the things we can do better is share that information, do that research so that we can speak about ourselves as an industry. I think the other thing that we do as an industry, I've already mentioned standards. We come together, we need to hear all voices on that. And then the final thing is, again, working with governments, being the voice, coming together and with common policy solutions and principles that we can then advance, you know, with local governments around the world. And ERC, we've come up with a set of policy principles focused on everything from immigration to real estate transactions to taxes and other regulatory issues. But we have to be out there advocating on our own behalf, because otherwise we're going to get lost in the shuffle.
Lovely. Thank you very much for those comments, Lynn. So Magali, is that the last question?
I think unfortunately it is, because we are right on the time that we promised the world that we would stop. Except if you want to stay 5 minutes more and we choose one more question, but otherwise I think we can call it today.
Okay. Well, what I think I'll do is I will attempt to summarize this incredibly diverse conversation that we've had today. It's been a really good discussion, and I think we could have gone off, as usual, we could have gone off on lots of different threads and spoken for several hours, which we didn't have this afternoon. So thank you very much to all the panelists for your input, and thank you very much to the audience for submitting your questions as well.